So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all for another insightful session organized by PMS Bazaar. Thanks for your overwhelming response and thanks for taking your time in joining with us. To introduce myself, I am Pallavarajan representing PMS Bazaar and I'll be your host for the day. So, today is a special day for us. By the time I speak, PMS Bazaar has crossed 17,000 subscribers. And on behalf of entire PMS Bazaar team, I would like to thank our subscribers for placing their trust and confidence with us. Today we have Team Merciless among us, Mr. Saurabh Mukherjee, who is the CIO and founder of Merciless. And then we have Mr. Pramod, who heads the sales. Apart from sales, he also actively participate in investment committee. And we also have Mr. Tesha, who is the portfolio manager for Merciless. So welcome you all, gentlemen. And before I hand over, I'll take a quick introduction about Merciless. Merciless was founded in the year 2018. The core investment team has worked together for 15 years. So Merciless offers consistent compounder and little champ. Both the strategies are top performing strategies since their inception and significantly outperform their respective benchmarks. Their consistent compounder was awarded as top performing PMS strategy by PMS Bazaar for the calendar year 2019. They have recently closed their subscription for Little Champ as it reached their AUM ceiling. And I congratulate entire Merciless team for achieving this in such a challenging time. So there are about 350 portfolio managers in the country as per SEBI reporting. And in less than 3 years, Merciless has reached within the top 15 PMSs with 3,000 plus investors who have trusted and put their money with Merciless so far and counting. In addition to consistent compounder and Little Champ, today Team Merciless will introduce and take us through their new PMS offering, Kings of Capital. And I wish them all the best for the new strategies. Over to you, Pramod.
Thank you. Thanks, Pallav, so much. And congratulations to PMS Bazaar for achieving the 17,000 crore users number. It's been a phenomenal journey. And from Merciless perspective, PMS Bazaar has always occupied a special place. It's the PMS Bazaar's annual conference at the Taj in Mumbai, where we announced our first ever strategy. So it will remain a special relationship between the two of us. We've thoroughly enjoyed the journey so far in the last 2 years, and we hope to continue this way for many more years to come. Thanks to the team at PMS Bazaar for all the support, right from consistent compounders to little champs, and now with the launch of Kings of Capital. And thanks to everybody on this call who has supported us in this journey for the last 2 years as well, whether as investors or well-wishers or simply the readers of our blogs and newsletters. We hope to continue to add value to your investment life. Today, it gives me great pleasure to announce our new PMS strategy. While it is new, the investment philosophy is pretty much the same old. You would have heard about it. It's just the context changes. Obviously, it is also perplexing just when, a week before the RBI released its financial stability report, suggesting that NPAs are going to reach 15%, which is pretty much the same day that we announced this strategy to the rest of the world. So to that extent, I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, whether, we've thought this through or not. Trust me, we have. And to tell you more about it, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Tej Shah, who's been with us pretty much right from the outset, not just at Merciless, but also he's been a colleague at Ambit Capital in the equity capital markets business. He had a brief stint away from us at Mayfield as a successful venture capitalist. Then when we announced Merciless, he came back to join us. Since then, he's been looking at the financial services part of the portfolio within CCP as well as LCP. So he's the brain behind the positions that you see in your PMS accounts as far as financial services is concerned. Together, we've been working on the Kings of Capital strategy for a while now. It's the work over the last 12 to 18 months that has helped us put together this portfolio for you. So to tell you more about it, without wasting any more time, over to you, Tej.
Thanks, Pramod. So Kings of Capital is a financial services focused fund. And over the past 6-7 years, we've seen that the financial services sector has seen multiple challenges. It started with Raghuram Rajan's asset quality review in 2013, 14, 15, when NPAs at the systemic level were only 3-4%. And over the past 6-7 years, we've seen NPA numbers just multiply over time. Each year has seen some or the other challenge pop up. 2016 saw demonetization, 17 saw GST introduction, 18 saw IL&FS crisis, 19-20 we've already seen DHFL and the Yes Bank crisis and the PMC Bank crisis. And on top of that, the COVID-19 lockdown has made the situation even worse. It has put a lot of pressure on the weaker lenders in the country. But it's interesting to note that it is only during a financial crisis like this that you can make a lot of money by investing in high quality financial stocks. Every time there is a financial crisis, storylines are pretty similar. There are comparisons which are drawn to the crisis of the 1930s. Solvency of banks is questioned. Business model of NBFCs start being questioned. The existence of NBFCs is questioned every time there is a crisis like this. However, like we see in the charts of the bottom of the screen, during a crisis like this, if someone were to simply invest in the bank nifty, if they were to invest exactly at the lowest point of the crisis, or if they were to invest 3 months after the crisis had hit its bottom, or even 3 months before the crisis had hit its bottom, returns would have been pretty healthy in relative terms versus the nifty as well as in absolute terms. By investing during a crisis like this, investing in the index itself, people could have made 25 to 30% returns. That leads us to 3 questions that need to be answered. Question 1 is, how do we know that the crisis is bottoming out? Where are we in the cycle? How do we know when do we recover? Question 2 is, even if we know that the crisis is bottoming out, how do we know which financial services stocks to invest in? What sort of filters do we run? What do we look at? Do we look at multiples? Do we look at growth prospects? Do we look at management teams? What do we look at? And question number 3 is, how do we know when to sell? What is our strategy on rebalancing, investing, exiting, etc.? So we'll try and answer these 3 questions in the coming slides. To answer question number 1 in a couple of slides, what we've seen over the past 40 years is that 4 times in these 4 decades, an Indian economic boom has been preceded by an American recession. In other words, never has an Indian economic boom occurred without an American recession preceding it. And this is not by simple coincidence. There are 2 primary reasons behind it. Number 1 is cheap oil. So if we look at the orange line in the chart, the orange line represents the price of oil. We see that every time there is an American recession, the American recession is represented by the area in gray, which is at the back of the chart. During an economic recession in the US, oil prices crash. So if you look at 1984, 1985, oil prices crashed by about 50%. Same thing, 1990, 1991. Oil prices crashed from $40 to $20. Similarly, 99 to 2000 and 2008-9 was even worse. Oil prices crashed from $140 to about $40-50, about 70-80% crash. Same thing we've seen this time around as well. Oil prices crash during an American recession. The second factor that plays out during a recession in the US is that the 10-year bond yield starts crashing. So every time there is an American recession, we see that the blue line, it also crashes along with the pricing, along with the crash in oil prices. And that is followed by the chevrons which are marked in red on the chart. The 4 chevrons in red are followed by the crashing of the orange line and the fall in the blue line. So cheap oil, cheap money are ingredients which are very important for an Indian economic recovery. And that is very, very highly correlated to what happens in India's financial ecosystem as well. So what we've seen over the past 20-25 years is that India's financial ecosystem goes through a period of crisis, which is followed by a period of recovery, and then a period of economic boom. And this happens. This has happened 2-3 times over in the past 2-3 decades. However, it is important to note that not all types of lenders are able to recover through this period of recovery, or go through the period of economic boom in the same shape and form that they entered the previous crisis. So what we've noticed is, whether it be the crisis of the late 90s, when about 80% of NBFCs got wiped off, if we look at HDFC Limited during that crisis, HDFC Limited's NPS doubled from 0.5% to 1% during the crisis, and P ratios halved. P ratios crashed from about 20 times to 8-9 times. So there has been a double impact on the stock every time there is a crisis like this, because profitability reduces as NPS double and PE ratios half. However, what is important to note is what happens after the crisis. So after the crisis, HDFC Limited achieved ROEs which it had never achieved in the past. It entered the crisis with ROEs of 16-17%, but it exited the crisis with ROEs of 23-24%. Same case with HDFC Bank during the global financial crisis. It entered the crisis with ROEs of 16, 17, 18%, exited the crisis with ROEs of 19, 20%. But what happens during the crisis remains very similar. NPAs increased from 1.5 to 2% for HDFC Bank. PA ratios crashed from about 30 times to 18 times. However, they started gaining market share post the crisis. And the reason that this happens is that, number one, these are lenders which have been able to raise liabilities during the crisis, post the crisis, during the period of recovery as well. So while other lenders struggle to raise survival capital, these are lenders which are easily able to raise growth capital as well. Secondly, as competition perishes, these lenders are able to pick and choose the credit of their choice. They are able to lend also at the rates that they want to lend at. So that leads to better NPA ratios. That leads to better net interest margins. And that is how we created the whole portfolio. We've chosen high quality names from the financial lending industry, from life insurance, general insurance, broking, and asset management. And the process that we followed is, we started out with a universe of about 95 to 100 stocks from the financial services sector. We ran our forensic filter on these stocks. And when we ran our forensic filter, we eliminated about the third of the universe. So about 30-35 companies get eliminated by way of our forensic filter itself. And we'll take you through our forensic filter. This is a bit different from what we do in CCP LCP. The whole theme, the whole filters remain the same. Thus the ratios change because these are financial companies. So about a third of the companies get eliminated by our forensic filter. Again, after this, we run our capital allocation filter. So this is to establish is whether these companies have been able to generate returns on equity well above cost of equity over the past 6-7 years. And here the ratios that we use are, have they been able to generate net interest margins which are increasing over a period of time? Have they been able to generate ROAs and ROEs which are improving over a period of time? Do their cost to income ratios improve over a period of time? And again, over here, we eliminate about 30 to 35 companies, simply because we see that there has been no consistency in their ability to generate returns on equity well above cost of equity. After that, we are left with about 20-25 stocks. This list of stocks is what, as a research team, we focus on and we do qualitative work on. And what we try to establish in this third layer of filtering or third layer of work is that whether these companies have sustainable barriers to entry, whether these companies have it in them to keep on generating returns on equity over the next 5, 6, 7 years, which are well above cost of equity. And the way we do that is by speaking to management teams, by speaking to people who've been on the board in the past, people who are existing board members in these companies. And also by corroborating what these people tell us by speaking to people who are doing the actual work on the ground. So whether it be in the case of banks or NBFCs, collection agents, DSAs, branch officers, branch managers, credit officers. Similarly in the case of insurers, whether it be actuaries or insurance agents, insurance brokers, so on and so forth. And after we have established these three things, by way of filter number one, which is our forensic filter, we've established that these are companies who have high accounting quality. By way of filter number two, we've established that these are companies who've in the past been able to generate returns on equity well above cost of equity. And by way of our qualitative work, by way of the work of the research team, we've established that these are companies which have high barriers to entry, sustainable competitive advantages, which can last over 5, 6, 10 years. And that is how we've created this 12-stock portfolio with a median market cap of about 55,000 crores. To take you in some more detail of our forensic screen, because this is pretty important, especially in the financial services industry. So we have about 11 ratios. To take an example of a ratio, for example, fee income as a percentage of net interest income. So what this ratio tells us is that what proportion of interest income is being booked as fee income. And in the case of Yes Bank, this was as high as about 55% versus a 28% for Kotak. So usually this ratio is about 25 to 30% for all banks versus it was almost twice that number for Yes Bank at 54-55%. Similarly, on the balance sheet, what we look at is one ratio that we look at is contingent liability as a percentage of net worth. So this for Yes Bank was 23 times its net worth versus a 4 times for Kotak. So we have 11 such ratios and we rank these companies based on these 11 ratios from a D1 to a D10. D1 being the best, D10 being the worst. And what we also try to do is what we established from the chart on the bottom right of the screen is that there is correlation vis-a-vis the share price returns as well. So correlation of accounting quality, correlation of our forensic filter vis-a-vis the share price returns over the past 3-4 years. And the way we established that is we created a portfolio of companies which are in the top 3 deciles, which is D1, D2, D3. And we created a portfolio of companies which are in the bottom 3 deciles, which is D8 to a D10. And when we ran this portfolio over the past 3, 4, 5 years, what we saw was that the companies in D1 to D3 generated a 10% return over the past 3-4 years, versus the companies in the bottom 3 deciles generated a minus 25%. So simply by following this mechanical approach of picking high quality financial companies just on the basis of our forensic filter, we could have generated about a 35% return, 35% alpha. And to take another example, another case study of our forensic filter, what we did was also with a housing finance company was we ran it through our forensic filter, which is DHFL, and for the past 4, 5, 6 years, DHFL has been rated as a D10 or our forensic filter. And there were primarily 3 red flags because of which DHFL rated as a D10. One was similar to Yes Bank, fee income as a percentage of net interest income. So this ratio for DHFL, it was the second worst amongst its peer sets, amongst its housing finance company peers. Only Reliance Home Finance rated below DHFL on this ratio. Similarly, treasury income as a percentage of net interest income. On this ratio again, DHFL rated the third worst amongst its peer set. The worst rated company was again a similar name, similar quality name as DHFL. Again, what these 2 ratios tell us is that DHFL was trying to make its P&L look much better than it actually was. By way of booking upfront income in the form of fee income or treasury income, what it did was it improved DHFL's ROEs, profitability, margins, etc., etc., while that was not actually the case. Another interesting thing that DHFL did was it routed a lot of expenses such as interest expenses through its reserves and surplus through its balance sheet. So for example, it issued a lot of zero coupon bonds and zero coupon NCDs, thousands of crores of such bonds and NCDs. And the interest on these bonds and NCDs was being routed through its general reserves, through its securities premium. And again, as a result of this, its P&L looked much better than it actually was. Its net interest margins looked much better than they actually were. And we have followed this approach of not working on companies which fall in the zone of thuggery, not even letting them pass through our filters, and eliminating about a third of the universe at this stage itself by way of our forensic screening model. And to take a look at how the overall portfolio has been constructed. We have about 60-65% of the portfolio in lenders, about 35%, 40% of our portfolio on the non-lending side. The non-lending side will include life insurers, general insurers, asset managers, and brokers. And what this does is, the non-lending side of the portfolio reduces the volatility of the portfolio and it improves the resilience of the portfolio. While the lending side of the portfolio, given that these are leverage plays in the economy, leverage business models, they over a period of time generate higher growth, higher alpha, while the non-lending piece, along with 15 to 20% growth, add resilience to the portfolio, lower the volatility of the portfolio. So if we were to look at the portfolio at the back test of this portfolio of the past 2.5 years, if someone would have invested in the portfolio on 1st April 2018, they would have made 12% returns over the last 2.5 years. And this is during a period of time which has seen multiple things go wrong. So whether it be the IL&FS crisis, Yes Bank, DHFL, or even the recent COVID lockdown, the COVID crisis. And despite all of this, the portfolio would have generated 12% versus Nifty of 5% or a Bank Nifty minus 2%. And the volatility of the portfolio would have been similar to the Bank Nifty, a bit lower actually, while Sharpe ratios would have been better than the Bank Nifty and the Nifty. And the reason behind this is the table on the bottom left of the screen. So because we focused on earnings growth, earnings sustainability, high ROEs, ability to generate ROEs in the future because of high competitive advantages, this portfolio over the past 5 years, despite seeing multiple challenges in the financial sector, would have generated a 19% growth. Similarly, ROE is also of 19%. Versus the Nifty, Bank Nifty, single digit numbers, pretty dismal numbers. Along with that, what we've seen is that the non-lenders in the portfolio, they have a pretty low correlation to the lenders, to the Nifty as well. Versus the Bank Nifty has a correlation which is as high as 95% with the Nifty. So to answer questions on volatility, thematic fund, one sector fund, we say that because this portfolio, just like CCP, LCP, has an earnings engine which runs at 19%, 20%, ROEs also which are as high as 19-20%, they are over a period of time able to generate returns, share price returns also, which are in the vicinity of 20%, as we have seen in the last 2.5 years. And finally, coming to question number 3 on how do we know when to sell. So we have 3 approaches in front of us. Approach 1 is, if we were to look at the global financial crisis or the crisis of the late 90s, if you would have invested during the crisis and held on to it for 3-4 years, you would have made decent, healthy returns over the next 3-4 years. So approach 1 is that we hold on to the portfolio for 3-4 years and then think about toggling, rebalancing after a period of time, as that would also save us from the drag on the portfolio after a 3-4 year period. Approach 2 is that as portfolio managers, we apply our brains, we put on our thinking hats, and we look at what sort of a market are we entering. If we see signs of a raging bull market, if we see a heated up economy, which with the evidence of which is seen in the number of IPOs or the number of QIPs during a year, then we toggle the portfolio. So in the past 10, 15, 20 years, what we have seen is every year which sees a large number of IPOs or a large number of QIPs, that is followed by a large drawdown in the market. Another similar sign is when we see the CP yields or the CD yields in the market falling sometimes even below the treasury bond yield. So when we see all types of lenders, whether it be a DHFL or a Yes Bank, raising cheap money, that is another sign of a raging bull market. And then we have 2 options in front of us. When we see a large number of IPOs happening, when we see CP/CD yields dropping significantly below treasury yields, we have 2 options in front of us. One is that we toggle the portfolio towards the higher quality lenders in the portfolio. which is the HDFC banks and the Kotaks of the world. The second option is that we move towards the non-lenders in the portfolio. We increase our allocation towards the non-lenders, which is the insurers, life insurers, general insurers, asset managers and brokers in the portfolio. And that way we try and reduce the volatility in the portfolio. And this we do over a 3, 4, 5 year period. Enter in a crisis, look at something like this after a 3, 4, 5 year period. And now to give you a few case studies on which type of stocks we own, why we hold them, and what is the reason that we keep on holding onto these stocks. So I'll give you 3 case studies. One is Bajaj Finance, another one is Kotak Bank, and third one is HDFC Bank. To give you an example and to take you through the case study of Bajaj Finance, the reason that we hold these stocks are pretty similar. One being high quality accounting, second being ability to generate ROEs well above cost of equity, and third being high barriers to entry. However, each of these companies have created barriers to entry which are pretty different from each other. They've played on their own strengths. They've identified their own strengths and created barriers to entry around those strengths. So in the case of Bajaj Finance, the barrier to entry is around big data, around analytics, around technology. So when Rajiv Jain entered Bajaj Finance in 2008-9, what they tried to do was they tried to find multiple profit pools where they could generate ROEs well above 20%, where they could have 80-85% of the market without competing with anyone. And then the profit pool that they found was the consumer durables financing business. So, and they successfully entered that business. Over the past 10 years have generated ROEs which are well above 30-35% for that particular segment. And they have maintained their market share as well in that segment. So today about 70-75% of consumer durables financed in India are financed by Bajaj Finance. And then they've started using that consumer durables financing piece as the funnel, as a customer acquisition funnel to acquire customers and then cross-sell multiple products to these customers. So once a customer is acquired through this funnel, once a customer is financed by Bajaj Finance through its consumer durables financing business, it is cross-sold multiple other products like home loans, LAP, business loans, professional loans, lifestyle, digital financing, gold loans, etc. And today, about 70% of Bajaj Finance disbursements are made to existing customers. What this does is that Bajaj Finance knows the repayment history of at least 70%, at least 3/4 of its loan book. It knows when these customers pay back. Do they delay their payments? What sort of repayment history do they have? It knows where this customer lives, which part of India, rural, urban, what sort of economic factors is the customer exposed to, etc., etc. And it has developed a barrier to entry around big data, which is so granular that it keeps on improving on that data pool. So, for example, in the case of business loans or professional loans, one of the data pools that it has created is for doctors. So, it identified doctors as a business segment to whom it can lend to, and it can lend to doctors because doctors are a segment which are very resilient. So, whether economy is doing well, not doing well, whether there is a COVID crisis or not, doctors or the healthcare business is a business which is pretty resilient even within the SME segment. So they identified this segment and they created a data lake of about 10 lakh doctors. And what it will include is when did that doctor say pass out of their college, out of their medical college? Which medical college did the doctor pass out of? Is it a top 10 college, a top 100 college or not? Which part of India does the doctor practice out of? Is it urban India? Is it rural India? Is it Maharashtra? Or is it some part of Jammu and Kashmir? And by way of such data pools, they have clustered these doctors into 600 subsegments. So 10 lakh doctors of India, each of them clustered into 600 subsegments, and Bajaj Finance knows each and every detail about these doctors. And as and when they start lending to these doctors, they have a 8,000 crore rupee loan book only out of these doctors, and their data keeps on improving as they get data on repayment, as they get data on how these doctors behave over a period of time. When you compare this data, technology, and asset side strength with the liability side strength, ability to raise capital, ability to raise liabilities at 6-7%, which is amongst the best in the Indian NBFC ecosystem, that is a great barrier to entry, which we believe that no one can break over at least the next 5-10 years. Now coming to Kotak Bank. The reason that we hold Kotak Bank is their perfection in capital allocation. Their barrier to entry is around capital allocation. So the way they have done this is, over the past 20-25 years, in the beginning, they learned multiple businesses within the financial services vertical by entering into joint ventures with the global best in those verticals. So for example, they learned vehicle financing by entering into a JV with Ford Credit. Similarly, they learned investment banking, brokerage by entering into a JV with Goldman, life insurance by entering into a joint venture with Old Mutual. Once they got the banking license, they started giving exits to each of these players, whether it be Ford, Goldman, or Old Mutual. And now each of these businesses are owned as 100% subsidiaries of Kotak. Similarly, another capital allocation masterstroke that they played was on the corporate financing loan book and building a strong liability base. So because they were a largely retail financer, retail focused NBFC, when they got the banking license, they had two challenges in front of them. That number one, how do they diversify this retail asset side retail base and also build a large corporate loan book? The second challenge that they had was, how do they build a branch banking model which had a large amount of customer accounts, which had a large amount of savings accounts, current accounts, and how do they build a large CASA franchise? The way that they did that was, one, they aggressively forayed into corporate lending during the 2008-9 global economic recession, during the global financial crisis. So in 2008-9, they doubled their corporate loan book. Similarly, in 2009-10, they increased their corporate loan book again by 60-70% on top of that. So while other lenders were exiting or receding from the lending ecosystem, from the corporate lending market, they kept on growing their corporate loan book. They entered the balance sheets of large corporates, and today they have a pretty well diversified loan book. Similarly, on the CASA franchise, over the past 10-15 years, they've been able to now generate 56%. They now have a 56-57% CASA ratio. And this is the highest in the Indian banking industry amongst the large banks. The highest CASA ratio over the past 10-15 years, a well-diversified loan book, and a full financial services holistic business, which includes insurance, vehicle financing, brokerage, everything, by learning from the global best. So this they achieved by a super capital allocation over the past 20-25 years. Now, finally coming to the case study of HDFC Bank. So over here, what we've observed the past 20 years is that they have followed a lot of systems and processes with a lot of rigor. And their focus on the systems and processes has led to phenomenal outcomes. Over the past 20 years, growth of 20-25% on the asset side, loan book growth of 20-25%, while maintaining superb asset quality 2.5%. And they've also mitigated a lot of risks that other banks have not been able to do. For example, whether it be credit cards, whether it be the retail lending business or the auto financing business, they let other people make the mistakes first. They let other lenders enter these businesses aggressively, and then they forayed into these businesses. Once they learned what the risks were in each of these businesses, they gradually ramped up their disbursements, gradually started gaining market share. And over a period of time, in almost every vertical, they've become the largest. Also, there have been a lot of questions over here, what happens when Aditya Puri leaves at the bank or are currently working at the bank. What we've observed is that because they've followed systems and processes with such rigor, they have a lot of tailwinds which are in their favor. Because other lenders are struggling within the banking ecosystem, if we see there are hardly 4-5 players remaining now. Over the next 2, 3, 4 years at least, we believe that their fund systems and processes will keep them in good state. So one of the group heads that we spoke to at HDFC Bank told us that when it comes to people, bench strength, or even talent in HDFC Bank, they might be at par with an ICICI or an Axis Bank, or an ICICI or Axis might be even a bit better off. But because over the past 20 years they focused on systems and processes, that is what has helped them in gaining market share and maintain their asset quality. So that we believe is their key to success, is their barrier to entry. And finally, coming to our fund structure, we offer 2 options. Option 1 is 2.5% fixed fees, and option 2 is 1.5% fixed fees with a 15% performance fee over a 10% hurdle. Yeah, so that's it from my side.
Tej, thank you. Thanks for taking us through the product. Pramod.
Yep.
Pramod, we have already taken a couple of questions while registering. So I have a couple of questions here. So let us finish this question and then we'll go on to the forum questions.
Sure.
Fine. And the first question would be, it is a collective question from most of the clients whom we coordinated, whenever we talk about Marcellus. Maybe it's sort of a feedback also you can take. Broadly the clients feel that, in an uncertain time, they wish to park their money in liquid strategy, and eventually or systematically they wish to move on to the core strategy. Typically what I mean is a systematic transfer plan, which is offered by a couple of PMSs in the country. So that is first suggestion or a question broadly from investor community. And the second question is that, technically somebody who wishes to invest in your consistent compounder or your new portfolio KCP, technically they have to invest ₹1 crore, 50 lakhs in KCP and 50 lakhs with consistent compounder. Why don't you give an option to an investor, with a minimum tick size of 50 lakhs as per SEBI requirement, and let's say, why don't you put 25 lakhs in CCP and 25 lakhs in KCP? So these are the 2 questions broadly we get so many times from the investor. So this would be the first question.
Okay. I mean, look, from a systematic transfer plan perspective, we believe, particularly if you're following a consistent compounding sort of a strategy, which is broadly the case across all our portfolios with a little bit of variant, where generally the earnings are upward trending. We believe the broad trajectory of those stock prices is also upward trending with a little bit of volatility. Given that, we don't see any merit in trying to stagger your investment. Staggering in some ways is a disciplined way of timing it, right? We don't see significant merit in doing that because we don't believe in timing the market. We still continue to buy at any point in time, irrespective of when you give us the money. We still continue to maintain that the purchase price has to be significantly below what our assessment of the intrinsic value is. As long as that is meant, the desired return outcome will be taken care of. And therefore, we don't see any particular need for staggering the investment. And also, we strongly believe that asset allocation is the domain of you guys like PMS Bazaar. Along with the client, you decide how much of the client's assets should be in different assets like cash, debt, stocks, and so on. Once you've made the decision to put the money in stocks, our job is to ensure that money goes towards the best stock possible. So our job is stock selection and the portfolio sizing, in terms of position sizing within the portfolio. We don't want to be doing your job. By all means, you along with your clients are free to transfer that incremental money at will, provided that the first tranche is 50 lakhs, because that we are bound by regulations. So effectively, it links to the point that we don't believe in timing the market. And furthermore, in a consistently compounding sort of a portfolio, there's hardly any benefit in timing or staggering your investments. And we've shown that in several of our newsletters as well. Your second question of dividing here again, you're right. It's not a regulatory requirement. It is a Marcellus requirement. We do want to ensure that certain products which are not meant for certain investors, which is again going back to the asset allocation point, which we've discussed, Pallav, you and I. All we require from our partners like you is to ensure that these products are advised appropriately to the relevant client. It could so well be that Kings of Capital is not meant for all of your clients based on their financial goals and the resulting asset allocation, where the required financial return out of the portfolio could be 18 to 20%, in which case CCP suffices their needs. And CCP is a very low risk product. Why do you even bother taking a higher risk through Kings of Capital and Little Champs? And to that extent, we don't want to, allow everybody and anybody to come in and say that, look, here's my 50 lakhs. Can you put 30 lakhs in this, 10 lakhs in that, and 10 lakhs in that? So it's a conscious choice on behalf of Marcellus rather than a regulatory requirement. And hence, we would require a minimum 50 lakhs investment in each of our schemes.
Fine. So I'll move on to the next question. It is from Mr. Arsh Gauti. Why should an investor go for Kings of Capital instead of consistent compounder when the expected return is almost similar? And how will KCP differ from CCP in terms of churn ratio and overlap?
So
I think, yeah, so I'll let's deal with the easy part first. So a consistent compounder certainly should be a core portfolio. I think everybody who's dialed in here hopefully has consistent compounder in their portfolio. And if they don't, I hope they swiftly get consistent compounder in our portfolio. Our hope is that every household in India which has the relevant corpus, the requisite corpus, has consistent compounder as their core compounding engine in their portfolio. I, for one, can't think of a better way to compound wealth at a moderated risk than CCP in our country. So CCP has in it financial services companies, as CCP investors know all too well. HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, Bajaj Finance are stocks which we have accumulated even more. Actually, we used to have it, but we've bought even more through the COVID situation in April, May. And HDFC Life is a recent addition to consistent compounders. So CCP has 4 financial stocks: HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, Bajaj Finance, and HDFC Life. In addition to these 4, Kings of Capital has 8 more financial services stocks. Now let's just step back and think about why are we launching Kings of Capital, right? What is the point? Why don't we just run consistent compounders and stay satisfied with that? Financial services is the largest sector of our economy. Nearly a quarter of India's GDP arises from this sector. It's, as you know, the largest sector of the stock market. More than a third of the stock market is financial services. There are 3 specific things happening in the country today which are extremely positive for market leading financial services franchises. Let's step back a little bit and just think through CCP first, then we'll come to KCP. What are we playing in CCP? In CCP, what we have consistently told you is we are focusing on dominant franchises which have 50, 60, 70, 80% market share and are able to crush opposition and keep compounding at a steady rate year after year, thereby driving your wealth forward at around 20% per annum. So for instance, Pidilite has 90% share in adhesives, it has 90% share in waterproofing, Nestle has 97% share in infant milk powder, Asian Paints has 55% share in paints, so on and so forth, right? Critical to the compounding engine is the dominance and is the ability to use that dominance to deliver very high ROCs, which in turn gives the free cash flow to compound franchises going forward. Financial services as yet isn't yet this consolidated. So for example, in banking, a bank as high quality, as moated and as powerful in compounding as HDFC Bank. Remember, HDFC Bank created in 95 has given you 270x in 25 years. So it's 27, 26% compounding on a consistent basis. Yet HDFC Bank's market share is all of 6%, right? Who dominates banking market share in India? PSU banks. 65% of banking market share, PSU banks. Have PSU banks generated a rupee of free cash flow, a rupee of shareholders' equity in the last 20 years? The answer is no. Zero shareholder returns. SBI, for instance, ROE has not exceeded cost of equity in the last 20 years or so, right? So PSU banks survive by taxing, by your and my tax dollars going to the government of India, which then puts it into the balance sheets of PSU banks. That's their basic business model. Now, why are we therefore placed in a beautiful position from consolidation in privates and in banking over the next 10 years? Because the government of India neither has the financial means due to COVID, due to the situation in the northern border. The government of India neither has the financial means nor any ideological commitment to back these PSU banks. So Air India took 30 years to die. The PSU banks will die twice as fast. As the PSU banks die, they shed market share, and you can guess who that market share will come to, right? It will be HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, and a couple of other private sector banks. Even if we assume HDFC Bank's market share moves from 6% today to a mere 10% a decade hence, you're comfortably looking at 25% share price compounding, 25% wealth compounding per annum from HDFC Bank over the next 10 years. It's $100 billion today. It should be pushing $1 trillion of market cap a decade hence. And even then, it'll only be 10% of the banking system in our country. Giants like SBI, BOB, Punjab National Bank, Indian Overseas Bank, Canara Bank, Allahabad Bank, Punjab Sindh Bank, they have very little shareholders' equity that they'll have after the morat is done. Their shareholders' equity will be beaten up badly, and the government doesn't have the money to recapitalize it. So trigger one for focusing on kings of capital. You're playing consolidation in the largest sector of the economy, financial services. Within financial services, the largest sector in banking, epic consolidation ahead of us. Second trigger, NBFC consolidation, right? They just go to that forensic fraud slide. So 2/3 of NBFCs in our country largely have operated for a long time on fabricated accounts, right? So Tej's forensic slide, he'll just bring it up, shows you that generally in financial services, 2/3 of financial statements are of dubious quality, and within that NBFCs obviously. So if you look at Tej's zone of opacity and zone of thuggery, I'm sure you know, I don't think I need you to tell you, that the bulk of NBFCs in our country fall in the zone of opacity and the zone of thuggery. Now, what's happened in our country historically is, through the CP market, these thuggish NBFCs have collected money. The opaque NBFCs have collected money through the CP market. How? The debt mutual funds. You work hard, you put your money in the debt mutual funds. Till 2018, the debt mutual funds were taking your savings willy-nilly, sticking it into NBFCs' balance sheets, NBFCs whose accounting made no sense at all. As Tej has explained in the subsequent slide here, some of the NBFCs' annual reports were so bad, you would laugh over your filter coffee, saying that this can be published in a country and a credit rating agency can give these thugs AAA rating. But that was the state of the country. Now, as you know, two things have happened to debt mutual funds. Firstly, last year SEBI made it very difficult for debt mutual funds to take your money and stick it in the balance sheets of fraud NBFCs. So positive development one. Second positive development, a large prominent NBFC's debt mutual funds ran aground in March this year, right? And that put the fear of God in the other NBFCs about doing this sort of thuggery, where they take your hard-earned money and stick it in the balance sheets of these lenders operating in the zone of opacity and zone of thuggery. Why is this important? Because 2/3 of India's NBFCs are now running out of money. And there are 10,000 NBFCs in the country. A powerful lender, a well-run, high-class lender like Bajaj Finance has only 2% market share. As we are seeing in the CP market, Bajaj Finance today is borrowing 1.5 to 2 percentage points cheaper than even other respectable NBFCs like say Shriram Transport, Cholamandalam. I'm not even going down the batting order and discussing the ridiculous housing finance lenders that populate the NBFC landscape. We're talking about comparing Bajaj Finance with other respectable lenders. The cost of funding gap has become 1.5 to 2%. That in turn means Bajaj Finance will gain market share, will pull away from the rest of the herd, and our job is to profit from that. So trigger one of consolidation, PSU banks demise. Trigger two of consolidation, zone of opacity, zone of thuggery, NBFCs decommissioned, sent out into retirement. We profit from that. Third trigger for consolidation, right? PMS Bazaar, Pallav Rajan just told you, they have hit 17,000 sign-ups, right? Pallav, you're 2 years old? 2 years old, the firm?
3 years old.
3 years old, right? Now, why is this happening? Why is Pallav Rajan's firm signing up 17,000? Why is Marcellus signing up 3,000 clients? Because we are financializing our economy. The RBI's household finance survey, it's easily available on the RBI website. Brilliant study. RBI's household finance survey says, out of India's $10 trillion of wealth, 95% is in physical assets. That means just $500 billion of our $10 trillion of wealth is in financial assets, right? What are all of us on this call? Why are all of us on this call on a Friday evening? Because everybody on this call, all 400 of you have realized that there is no point in sticking my hard-earned money in flats and gold. It does not work. It does not create wealth, right? You, us, the 17,000 people on Pallav's mailing list, our 3,000 clients have all reached the same conclusion, right? I don't think the 20,000 people we're discussing here are wrong. We have figured out as a nation that we have to invest more in financial assets. Now, let's make some reasonable assumptions. 5% of our 5% of our assets today are in financial assets, so $500 billion. Let's assume a decade hence that becomes 15%, just 15%, which is in line with other countries at our per capita income level. 5 goes to 15. That means a decade hence we'll have $1.5 trillion of financial assets. That means every year we should be adding, as a country, we should be adding around $100 billion of financial assets. Who will benefit from that? Logically, high-class life insurers like HDFC Life will benefit from that. Top quality general insurers like ICICI Lombard will benefit from that. Top quality asset managers will benefit from that. High quality brokers will benefit from that. Therefore, the Kings of Capital portfolio has these savings plays as well. As Tej said, 40%, 45% of the portfolio is a play on savings. 55 to 60% is a play on lending. In one portfolio, you play the best banks, profit from the demise of PSU banks. You play the best NBFCs, profit from the demise of thuggish and opaque NBFCs. You play the best life insurers, general insurers, asset managers, and stockbrokers, profit from the financialization of our country. Right? Your call. We think it's a auspicious time to do it. We think the stars have aligned nicely with COVID spelling the demise of weaker lenders, with COVID leading to a rise in financial savings. And just like Consistent Compounders gives you the choicest plays, the highest quality plays on the best run, best moated companies in the country as a whole, Kings of Capital is doing exactly that for you, but in the specific context of the largest sector in our economy, financial services. So absolutely, CCP should be the core of your portfolio. If you have put 100 rupees in CCP, you should think about putting around 50 rupees in KCP. Back to you, Pallav.
Saurabh, thanks. And in fact, you have covered most of the question within this one question. So I appreciate that. So
now maybe it wasn't intended like that. I mean, the idea was to provoke more interesting questions. Anyway,
it's there. Again, broadly, most of the question are on the valuation side. I picked, one question which will cover most of the question there. The best private banks like HDFC, Kotak traded much higher multiples than the not so good private banks like ICICI, Indus Bank, and public sector banks. Large part of the outperformance were due to the focus on the retail borrowers and avoidance of corporate NPAs. But with competition now catching up, should the valuation premium narrow down?
So I don't know which competition the questioner is referring to. Hey, let's go to that standard deviation wala slide where you show the valuation Tonkov. So I think first thing let's focus on. Let's leave this mythical competition, because as I discussed, most of the competition has no tier 1 today. So let's focus first on valuation. So if you see on this slide, I think it's a just outstanding slide from Tej. Firstly, look at how Nifty banks obviously got smashed by COVID, black line, and obviously it's not recovered. But look at how the best lenders and non-lenders, right? So the green line is the best lenders in the country. Kotak Bank, HDFC Bank, Bajaj Finance are there. So in spite of the bounce back, we're still significantly short of the March levels or the January levels. In spite of the bounce back in the prices of Kotak, HDFC Bank, and BAF, we're still shy. We're still 20% shy of the levels that the lenders were trading at back in January. And as I said, and as I think as everybody on this call knows, these lenders have gained market share as the weaker NBFCs are falling by the wayside, as the PSU banks and the weaker private sector banks are falling by the wayside. So you're getting these top quality lenders, the green line, you're getting them 20% cheaper than Jan, and yet their industry position is far stronger than it was in Jan. Similarly with the non-lenders. So the blue line is the non-lenders. So this is the top asset managers, the top insurers. Obviously there the rally has been stronger and they are still 5-10% shy of their Jan levels. But I don't see valuation as a concern for premium plays. The competition point I hope is easily understood, right? I just told you guys, and and it's easily verifiable. You can ask your local bank manager, or you can ask your local wealth manager. He will tell you that Bajaj Finance, for the first time in its existence, and for the first time in my career, I'm seeing the funding cost gap between Bajaj Finance and respectable NBFCs like Chola and Shriram Transport open up to record highs. I'm not even discussing here Piramal Enterprises or Repco Home Finance or PNB Home Finance or any such. We're comparing Bajaj Finance to respectable lenders, and we are seeing record gap in the cost of funding, right? Obviously, if your raw material for a lender, the main cost is the raw material, which is cost of money. If the raw material for Bajaj Finance or a HDFC is so much cheaper, it goes without saying the market share consolidation will be superb going forward, and therefore, if anything, COVID has been a blessing. Just like Asian Paints has benefited from COVID mightily, right? You would have heard Asian Paints' June-July sales are 20% up YOY. Obviously, the paint sector is nowhere up 20% YOY. So Asian Paints therefore has gained market share in COVID. Similarly, HDFC Bank, quarter to June, credit offtake growth in the country 7%. HDFC Bank growth 21%. Obvious market share gains by HDFC Bank. Ditto for Bajaj Finance, right? So what you're doing is, whether it's in paints or undergarments through CCT, or in life insurance, motor insurance, asset management, banks, NBFCs through the kings of capital, you're playing the dominant players who are gaining market share in the wake of COVID. In lending in particular, you're getting these class lenders 20% cheaper courtesy COVID. I hope it's a free gift you don't turn down. If you do, you'll have abundant time to regret turning it down, right? So valuations are not a concern, right? There's another way to see that the valuations are not a concern. If you see the top table on this page, what Tej has shown you is in the last 2 years, returns from this portfolio are 12%, right? So lenders 10%, non-lenders 16%. Overall returns in the last 2 years have been 12%. Earnings growth, if you see the bottom left, earnings growth of this portfolio over the last 2 years or the last 5 years has been around 20%. So in PE multiple terms, the portfolio has come off. So you're getting market leading franchises with powerful barriers to entry, high competitive advantages. Again, I stress, look at the cost of funding gap. It is immense, right? It is not conceivable that another NBFC can now compete with a Bajaj Finance. You cannot. 2% funding gap is immense. This is 2% funding gap geared 5 times. Remember, Bajaj Finance runs on a gearing of 5 times. That means it's a 10% ROE gap. That's life and death, right? Most other NBFCs, including other good NBFCs, will struggle to exceed their cost of equity. Bajaj Finance will chug out 25% cost of equity with lower gearing, right? You might as well give up on other NBFCs and load up on Bajaj Finance. You should do that, by the way, regardless of whether you invest with us. It's a straightforward thing to consider, right? So you're playing champion franchises who are clearly, transparently benefiting from COVID. You're getting them cheaper courtesy of COVID. I don't think you can ask for a better gift than that from the financial services industry.
And Saurabh, there are again couple of questions which is around the market. So I think we'll have to take this. With market ran up more than 40% from its low, with large cap ran up the most, how it will continue to grow further from here? So somebody is interested. Many of them are interested to know on the market side on your take.
Right, they just go back to the fraud slide again, please. So folks, I've never really, neither I nor anybody else in Marcellus, we don't lose that much sleep about the market, because Tej is showing you the picture on the bottom left for the financial services industry. But you might have seen charts from my colleague Ashwin Shetty for small caps, which are very similar. and from our colleague Rakshit Ranjan for consistent compounders, from Ashwin for Little Champs. 80%, 70-80% of listed businesses in India largely make up their numbers, fabricate their numbers. So if you guys are investing in the market, Nifty or Sensex or BSE 500, I don't think we can be of much help to you. I think you need to pray to some higher power to help you compound. Because if you're investing in the broad indices, you're largely investing in the bulk of your hard-earned money is going on companies whose books are cooked and who generate no free cash flow, right? So I've even really not really lost that much sleep on the market. It's about, where is the Nifty today or the Sensex? It's about as much interest to us as say what will happen in the IPL that will be held in the Middle East in Dubai. Will there be something, given that it'll be played in the wake of COVID, will the IPL be different this time? So it's a kind of esoteric interest to us, right? There's no point worrying about companies whose numbers themselves are in the zone of thuggery or the zone of opacity. The more interesting question I think to ask is, how does COVID create opportunities for you and us to make money from? And what risks, what threats does it create for us, right? So let's look at both of these, right? How does COVID create opportunities, and what threats should we be mindful of in the wake of the pandemic? The opportunity is obvious, right? The opportunity is whether it's demonetization, whether it is GST, or whether it is COVID, you slam the Indian economy with a exigency, a catastrophe. Every time you do that, the strong get stronger and the weaker fellows get wiped out. So whether it be in paint or undergarments, we've discussed it before in several calls with you. Paint is consolidating in the hands of two companies. Undergarments is consolidating. I reckon it'll end up in the hands of two companies again. Already sectors like adhesives have consolidated. Jewelry is consolidating, arguably in the hands of, say, a Tanishq or a Titan, right? So that's easy to see. This dynamic is even more accentuated in financial services because of the inherent gearing. Lenders operate on, as you know, 10:1 gearing typically. So because there is inherent leverage in financial services, the weakness of the second rung players gets exaggerated, gets accentuated. Their poor capital allocation decisions, their lack of comparative advantages, their lack of risk assessment processes, that those mistakes get amplified by the 10x leverage. And in financial services, the lenders blow up quicker. They just turn to that slide on HDFC and HDFC Bank consolidation, right? The one you showed. So example of how quickly financial services consolidates is that slide Tej was showing you, where, the left panel, look at the left panel. This is the NBFC crisis of the 90s. This is like consolidation in fast forward. So in 1997, India had 50,000 lenders. India had 50,000 NBFCs in 1997. The NBFC crisis blew out, bankrupted 80% of the lenders. By the year 2000, India had 10,000 lenders, which is the same number we have today. HDFC got slammed by it, so you can see NPAs doubling in the third row from the bottom. You can see the PE multiple getting crushed in the penultimate row from the bottom. But by 2000, 80% of the NBFCs have been bankrupted, and then you can see how HDFC benefits from that in the subsequent years, right? So financial services, the consolidation happens much faster than it happens in undergarments or paints because the levered nature. Similarly, if you remember 2009, the year HDFC Bank came of age, why did HDFC Bank's PE multiple recover so quickly after Lehman, right? So see, in 2009, HDFC Bank's PE drops almost halves, right? And then almost doubles within a year. Why does that happen? It's because in 1 year, I remember GE Capital, Citibank, ICICI Bank, all of these big players exited car finance, credit card finance, and HDFC Bank stepped into the breach and consolidated. That's exactly what's going to happen again, right? I can't give you a cast iron guarantee. What I can tell you is the cinema is playing out. This movie is playing out on the TV screens near you every single day of the week, right? Every day of the week, the weaker financial services players are being ostracized and blocked from funding. Every day of the week, the market is being handed in a platter to HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, Bajaj Finance, etc. And this process, which consolidated HDFC's market share at the turn of the century and HDFC Bank's market share during Lehman, the same is happening again. This time the beneficiaries are HDFC Bank, Kotak Bank, Bajaj Finance, etc. Right? So this dynamic is extremely powerful, and COVID is accentuating it across all industries, especially in financial services. Now, what is the negative that COVID creates? The negative that COVID will create is it'll wipe out lots of companies in industries where the prospects clearly are bleak over a 2, 3, 4 year period. Hotels, hospitality, leisure, travel, right? There's not much anybody can do. I think there's not much the government of India can do. Hotels, hospitality, leisure, travel will have a bleak outlook, even if you assume a vaccine next year. It'll be a long time before these things come back. And as is evident from, I'm sure, your neighborhoods and the neighborhoods all of us live in, a lot of these hotels, hospitality, airlines, and travel-related, transport-related companies will not be able to open after the morat. And therefore, it's imperative on us to invest sensibly, avoid lenders who have heavy exposure to these sectors. Clearly, these sectors are, there's beneficiaries as well, right? OTT, content providers, cloud kitchens are beneficiaries, right? And I'm sure you guys are seeing it in your part of the world. We are seeing cloud kitchens booming in Bombay. I'm seeing cloud kitchens. I'm hearing from friends in Delhi, cloud kitchens are booming. So the restaurant sector slides, cloud kitchens rise, OTT rises, the airlines suffer, hotels suffer. So that is the nature of the free market economy. We got to be cognizant of that. And obviously in the diligence that Tej and his team are doing, we're avoiding lenders who have exposure to these sectors, right? Who have exposure to truckers, transporters, airlines, hoteliers, restaurateurs, and so on, right? So COVID has created opportunities. It has created risks. As rational people, we're going to steer clear of the risks and capitalize on the opportunities. That's why you pay us to manage your money. Back to you, Pallav.
Thanks, Saurabh. So we'll take, one or two more questions because of time constraint. But however, we have a couple of questions which is lined up. So participant will try to address this question. We'll send it to Marcellus team and we'll try to get the report from that, and we'll ensure that you get the answers for this question. But meanwhile, we'll take one or two questions, Saurabh. So I'm a happy customer of CCP and LCP. I'm looking to make investment in KCP. At LCP, you have some sort of an exit plan. I'm not sure. Client is asking. With KCP being a sectorial PMS, do you intend to return money when a time to exit comes?
Tej, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So, like we explained, let me just get to that slide. Yeah. So there are 2-3 ways that we'll think about when to toggle within the portfolio. Approach one was when we see that there is a raging bull market, when we see a large number of IPOs in the market, and that's happened thrice over in the past 15 years. Every time we've seen a large number of IPOs in the market, that has been followed by a large drawdown. And these are the 2-3 largest drawdowns in the past 10-15 years. Every time there has been a drawdown, it has been preceded by a large number of IPOs. And what we plan to do at a time like this is, number one, either move to higher quality lenders, which is the HDFCs and Kotaks of the world, or toggle the portfolio towards the non-lenders within the portfolio, which is the insurance companies, asset managers, or brokers. And take an example of this crisis as well. So while lenders have seen some challenges, while there have been challenges around collection during the lockdown, while NPAs will definitely rise at a systemic level for everyone, if we look at the insurers, if we look at, say, life insurers or health insurers, the awareness for life insurance, health insurance has increased. We've seen that in June, July, numbers are getting back to pre-COVID levels in the insurance space. Similarly, in motor insurance, we've seen that they've reported ROEs and profit numbers, which they've never reported in the past 10-15 years during the June quarter. ROEs of 25%, no general insurer has reported in the past 10-15 years. Same thing in brokerage. We've seen 70-80% YOY growth in number of brokerage accounts. So these within the financial sector are subsectors which are very uncorrelated to each other. These are sectors which are less volatile than the lending sector, because the leverage in the lending sector is anywhere between 5, 7, 10x. Versus in the insurance industry or in the broking and asset management industry, much lower. These are less volatile, drawdowns are lower. And as a result of that, we plan to move towards the higher quality lenders or the non-lenders in the portfolio when we see something like this happening.
Fine, Tej. So one last question, Saurabh. How many more PMS strategies are in pipeline in Merciless?
So we work on, it takes us 1 year to build a portfolio. So we are crunching away. Econometric work is underway. It'll take us a while because it does take a lot of research. I think Tej worked on this full throttle with his colleagues for a good year to bring the portfolio to market. As I said, we also did look for a strategic opportunity. COVID has given us that opportunity on a platter, which is the demise of PSU banks, the demise of low quality NBFCs, and the rise of financial savings as people get scared and they realize that buying flats and buying gold is not a clever idea. So we're doing the econometric modeling work, then we'll do the financial modeling work, then it'll be followed by 7-8 months of bottom-up research. I wish we could do it quicker, Pallav. I wish we could do it quicker. I've been doing it for 44 years. As you can see, I have a lot less hair on my head than Tej has. And Pramod and I are in a race to see whose hairline recedes faster. I think I'm winning that. I think my hairline is receding faster. But in all seriousness, it takes time. It takes a lot of number crunching, then a lot of bottom-up research. And as and when we feel we have a product which satisfies our 3 criteria, which is clean companies, high quality capital allocation, very strong barriers to entry. As and when we feel we have something like that, we'll come to the Indian market again. But until then, don't miss this opportunity. Not only is this a great portfolio, you're looking at the largest sector of the economy, the largest segment, the largest sector in the stock market. You're getting a chance to buy the dozen best names with great capital allocation, clean accounting, powerful franchises. You're getting them at very attractive valuations. Don't lose this opportunity.
Great, Saurabh. Saurabh, Tej, and Pramod, thank you very much for your time. And as mentioned, like participant, thanks for your time. And there are a couple of questions which is not answered. But broadly, I think all the question has been addressed during the other questions. I'll share the questions to Pramod. I would request Merciless team to come back so that I can send back these answers to these respective investors who have asked the question. And thanks for your time. And looking forward to hosting another event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.